and
Yes, okay.
he just stepped down a couple of days ago.
Oh,
What I
okay.
what I do know is that so he would theoretically be a citizen or a civilian now, and it wasn't anywhere near as sensational as David Grush. Nonetheless, people did testify. You know, two people in particular that caught my eye was Tim Gallaudet, Rear Admiral, who talked about objects underwater that were exhibiting a technology that was impossible. You know, and then you had, you know, who ran the ATIP program, Lou Elizondo, or one of them, uh,
Hmm.
testify, under oath that there's a crash retrieval program. I mean, that's not a nothing burger. And then of course Michael Schellenberger having a name to work with. Uh, um, was it Immaculate Constellation? I mean, we've heard about a repository somewhere where all this high, you know, high resolution data is kept. I mean, everybody's been talking. I mean, Gary McKinnon went to jail for looking for it and found some of it. So it makes perfectly good sense they would have a name, for they've got it somewhere, right? So I thought it was, yeah, it was amazing to be there. It was amazing to experience it in person.
The hearing created a real new momentum in this whole journey of disclosure, and there were senators and members of Congress who really from there decided there should be a legislative push to move ownership of artifacts within the program to the government, that the government should own these, and that the process of disclosure, what the public is allowed to know, should be handed to a presidential panel. And these were provisions entered into the defense procurements bill that was being put together in 2023. It had bipartisan support. It passed in the Senate, and then the House slapped it down. Why did it fail, and how did it fail?
Well, a couple things. I mean, I've talked to some people that have materials in labs, and they're like, "Well, eminent domain, yeah, we're not too happy about that." And so basically, my understanding of it that has been explained to me, it's the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023 that was Rounds and Schumer and Rubio and Gillibrand. I'm trying to think who else. Anyway, basically, I guess that it would require anyone in possession of so-called metamaterials, for better part, anything recovered that's alien in nature, to the government. And they didn't like that. A lot of people didn't like that. Now, that was one aspect of it. But there was another thing that David Grush was very frustrated about, and I don't quite blame him. It were two people in the House, Mike and Mike, and I'm trying to think of their last names.
Mike
Uh,
Rogers and Mike Turner.
Mike Rogers and Mike Turner provided to select members of Congress. And my understanding that the new head of Arrow, John Kosklowski, and that has, as of 2020, the name of the gatekeeper to the crash retrieval program. I mean, they have that name. That person's alive and kicking. Whether he's still the gatekeeper today or not, I don't know. But they have a
And
name.
did you get any sense of whether that name was what Admiral Wilson is claimed to have called a corporate type, or or is it someone in government?
I wish I knew. I really don't
Mm,
know. But I've heard that they're in and out.
yes, okay.
They've got
There
one
is,
foot in and one foot out.
yes, understood.
I know it's frustrating, right? Everybody wants more, but what's happened in the last few years?
Oh, it really has. So much has changed, really, since 2017, when the
Unbelievable.
New York Times
I
ran with that story, thanks to
I
Leslie
never
Kean.
thought, I never ever thought that was going to happen. I never thought that I'd be asking sitting members of Congress, do we have alien spaceships in our possession and alien bodies, without being laughed out of the room and ostracized for the rest of my life from ever stepping foot back into Washington, D.C. You know, I mean, I never thought when I was making see, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016. I was 5 years in to making the phenomenon when that story dropped, right? December 2017, front page, New York Times. Do you think I saw that
Yes.
coming? And look, I know Leslie, and I've known Leslie forever. I was the first person to put her on camera, right out of the blue, with Tim
Oh,
Kaine.
wonderful.
Yeah. And
So,
so she kept that secret from me as well. She knew I was working on a documentary because I interviewed her.
So
And
the
then
key
that
players
dropped.
there were Leslie Keane and, of course, Chris Mellon.
Yes.
Chris Mellon, tell us a little bit about him, because he's been quite important in moving the conversation to do that. How is he still alive? He seems
Yeah.
to have some little cone of...
Audience, and I'm sure a lot of you know this already, but it wasn't like the government had some sort of, epiphany in 2017 and decided that the general public needs to know more, or there needs to be more transparency on this topic. It was a couple of people working on the inside that decided to take action in their own hands, and they found a loophole and walked those tapes out of the Pentagon and on the front page of the New York Times. That's how it all happened. And Chris Mellon is the one that walked those tapes out. I mean,
Yes.
yes, he found a loophole, but he was still, still taking a chance.
For
Still taking
sure.
a chance, because, yeah, everybody
Getting
wanted
back,
that evidence. What?
getting back to the technicalities of the program.
Yes.
So they're working on materials. They're seeking to reverse engineer materials, reproduce materials with the same properties. And this has been privatized to certain groups within the aerospace industry. Um, they're able to do this because of massive black budgets, or whatever we should call them. There then has to be a financial incentive on those corporations not to disclose their progress too quickly. By privatizing the whole thing, haven't we inevitably slowed down the process of disclosure?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I think the program is the first time I really kind of explored the politics of disclosure, right? And I never really thought as in depth about it, the complexities of it, as I did with Hal Puthoff, who's in the film, who was in somewhat an official capacity set up to, along with a number of other people, to kind of review the pros and cons of disclosure and how it might go about. And because let's just put all of our skeptics aside for a moment and just say that it's true, that we really do have recovered. We can get the significant advantage. You imagine putting weapons. Yeah, it's like, well, let's see. They could say, the government come out and say, well, yes, it's true. This crash retrieval program is real, and we do have, biologics and debris from a number of cases spanning, over 80 years. Then, the global, I mean, it's a global implications, right? It's not just in the United States. So then what happens? Well, a lot of people aren't going to believe the government because the trust level of the government is so low. So, all right, prove it. Well, now they're going to have to show what they've got. Are they going to be worried about that getting into the wrong hands? How do they do it? How do they make that announcement and then prove that they have it? It's I don't even know, quite honestly. I've thought about it now. They could say, well, you could take our word for it. We have it. Maybe they could take a panel of international prominent scientists into one of the labs, show them what they've got, and they can all vouch. Take picture. People are going to say it's AI. Like, how do you do it? How do you execute that? I honestly don't know. I mean, if the president of the United States comes forward and says, my fellow Americans, has been brought to my attention, then what? You can't make that claim and not back it up with proof. They're going to want proof. Are you going to give? I don't know. I really don't know.
What we've had up... Yeah, for sure. It's complex, for sure. What we've had up until now...
Complex. I used to just think, oh, the president can just make an announcement. Oh, isn't that cool? And everyone will be like, wow, that's amazing. We're not alone. Group hug. Not what's the best.
What we have had up until now is little bits of information sort of seeping out at the edges, and then it's almost as if military intelligence is watching and waiting for the public reaction to the little bits of information that are getting out there. And I think maybe an example of this is clearly the greatest proportion of the work on the program is absolutely behind closed doors. But at the tip of the iceberg, we have heard from people associated with the program, and that would be the physicist Jacques Vallée, astrophysicist Jacques Vallée, physicist Eric Davis, microbiologist, immunologist Gary Nolan. They have talked about their work on metamaterials. And so I'm interested in, first of all, what's an immunologist? What's a microbiologist doing working on metamaterials? And what are those materials? What has been said publicly about what they have and are working on?
I tried to get more details when I got the opportunity a few years ago to go in the lab with Gary Nolan and Jacques Vallée, and I am no scientist, but can you put it in layman's terms? Like, what are we doing here? Why? How? How is it different? And so basically, my understanding of it is, and it's history, but that he had certainly replaced everything that runs on Jet A fuel. You know, I don't know. I really don't. I tend to think not, but from the people that I've talked to and I've met, and they could be wrong as well. They could be wrong as well. I don't know. I just, I think it's non-human intelligence personally.
Yes. The phrase that David Grush used in that hearing was non-human biologics. We're now hearing more about non-human intelligence. It's slightly vague language, and I'm just sort of trying to put two and two together and thinking they've got Gary Nolan. He's a microbiologist. He's an immunologist. He's analyzing materials from UFO retrievals. And then I listened to the testimony of U.S. defense personnel who tried to engage with anomalous technology. And they often talk about the craft moving as if the craft were conscious, as if the craft were creatures rather than pieces of technology being piloted. And so I wonder if there's something interesting about the materials we've got that is slightly blurring whether we're looking at biologics or technology, and that's why they've got Gary Nolan.
I remember, and a lot of people say that this individual is quite controversial, but it was Philip Corso. I tend to lean in the direction that he's telling the truth. However, there were a number of inaccuracies in his book, Roswell the Day After, or the day after Roswell, that was presented at the 50th anniversary of Roswell, Colonel in the and he had told me that talked about symbiotic, and I kept saying, what do you mean by symbiotic? And he said, well, that the craft would somehow, this was just probably him speculating, I don't know, or lying, I don't know. But he said that, and a number of other people said this as well, that there were panels or something on the craft that it looks like you just put your hands on it, and that there would be a connection like between the human body or whatever and the craft itself, almost like it was alive as well. That was explained to me like 25, maybe 30, I don't know, 27 years ago. I remember hearing about that. And the word they used was symbiotic. And so maybe, but again, I'm not a scientist and I really don't know what I'm talking about.
No, it's really intriguing, isn't it? I'd love to dig into that a little bit further.
To know how much progress they've made. I'd love to know where they put the bodies. I'm told there's an entire craft at underground, Dayton, Ohio, right, Patterson Air Force Base. I'm also told that there are entities there as well. But and those are people that shared that with me that will remain anonymous, but that I certainly trust. Obviously, there's stuff elsewhere. Lockheed Martin's got stuff, and Raytheon's got stuff. So and somebody was telling me that the 1953, and it's actually in the memo in the film, the program. I don't know if you remember that part or not. When I interviewed Christopher Mellon, that memo that he had.
Yes.
They give it specific. They say Kingman, Arizona, 1953, or the 1950s Kingman, Arizona. It was 1953, And I talked to a couple of people about that specific craft, and they said it landed. It didn't crash. I said, okay. How do we know that? Well, it was sitting on the ground, and they just walked away. I said, well, how do you know that? Maybe it was a drone. No, the door was open. They let the door open and just walked away. I was like, really? Yeah, and they said it didn't have a scratch on it. Not a scratch. Like it was absolute. And I don't know if we figured out how to fly it or not. I don't know. I don't know.
That reminds me, just to flag this phrase, retrievals, because people often ask me, surely these craft can't travel interstellar distances with such precision and then crash when they get here. The word retrievals doesn't imply all these materials are from crashes, does it?
No, and you know, one of the aspects of the Virginia UFO case that intrigued me were the witnesses that I talked to. The first-hand witnesses that I talked to that saw the cigar-shaped object in flying, right, before it crashed. They said it had a big gash in the back of it. I said, what do you mean? What? They said, yeah, it had a gash. And there was a weird white vapor coming out. They didn't say smoke. Like a white vapor, it was different. And it was in trouble. It was struggling to stay in the air. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. I heard that from 3 different people. How did it get a gash? Was it struck by, it was obviously struck by something. Was it struck by a meteorite? Was it struck by lightning? Was it us that shot at it? That always puzzled me and still puzzles me. Are we shooting these things down? Are there certain weapons perhaps that we're detonating that's affecting these things? You know, I think one of the reasons why they talk about NHI, non-human intelligence, is because, you know, what happens if they're right here? What happens if they're living underground? What happens if they're living in the oceans? What happens if they're interdimensional? Maybe they're not interplanetary, or maybe it's all of the above. Maybe there's some time travels. Maybe, you know, they're interplanetary. Like if you look at Betty and Barney Hill, they gave specifics according to their testimony on where these individuals came from. You know, I mean, it's so complex, right? It's, you know, I remember getting involved with the phenomenon, starting to investigate UFOs, now UAP, 30 plus years ago, and I was like, I'm gonna do a documentary on UFOs and I'll find out what's going on. And I was thinking to myself, well, it's a big universe, and you know, it's probably just spilling over with life, and we get periodic visitation for whatever reason. The governments decide to keep it quiet. And here I am 30 plus years later with so many more questions than I have answers. Yeah. And I think to myself, this is so much more complex, because the phenomenon, whoever's behind it, they too are in on the secrecy. I'll give you a number of examples. I mean, case in point, Socorro, New Mexico. I've looked into that landing case. I think it's one of the most well-documented close encounters of the third kind in U.S. history. There were all kinds of evidence on the ground, and burn marks, and pod marks, and footprints, and a number of people that saw the craft flying. Of course, Lonnie Zamora, the police officer on duty. But if you look at where they land, and I've been there many times, it was in an arroyo on the outskirts of town. So once they got down below a certain height, they were kind of hidden on the desert floor. And as soon as Lonnie, the police officer, rolled up on them, they got back in that craft and left immediately. You know, they could have stuck around, made contact, and they didn't want to do that. You know, you look at Fire in the Sky, you look at Travis Walton. That case is phenomenal. And, you know, they cared enough about him because I guess he injured himself. He got exposed to the propulsion, whatever, as he got too close, as it was spooling up and ready to take off, and got exposed to something and knocked him out like a Raggedy Ann doll. And his buddies left, and they came back. He was gone. And then they deposited him, not in the same place where they took him If they would have, I've been there in Snowflake, Arizona, up in the mountains, that mountain area. That's remote. If they would have dropped him off 5 days later up there, I guarantee you he would have died. They didn't do that. They cared enough about his well-being, but they didn't want to expose themselves, so they waited till nightfall. Roughly 5 days later, they dropped him on the outskirts of town right near a phone booth. And they did it in a little valley, a little dip to minimize it. So they zipped down, dropped him off, and then whoo, took off.
Are allegedly the memo of a conversation between Admiral Thomas Wilson, who I think headed up the DIA, is that right? And Eric Davis, the astrophysicist, and they're talking about the program, who's running it, etc. These are the notes. So any of our viewers or readers know about these notes, but apparently Ronald Moultrie, U.S. Defense Undersecretary for Intelligence and Security,
Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut's house after he died. But I was so busy trying to get the phenomenon out the door, and I was interested, but he's like, "God, this is going to be the document of the century, or of the biggest." And because what's interesting about the Wilson Davis memo is that nothing's redacted. All the names are there. He basically says, "I can't really talk about that." Of course, I'm talking to other people about it. Off the record. In fact, I talked to Chris Mellon about it. Chris goes, "I don't feel comfortable talking about that." Now that's odd. Really? Okay. So, but it says in there, he was head of the DIA. He was an admiral part of that. Wilson.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm trying to think of his full name. But in any case, he says
Admiral Thomas Wilson.
Admiral Thomas Wilson. If this document ever leaks, I will deny it emphatically. I'll never say it ever happened. So I contacted a few people that were in a position to subpoena him and bring him into a skiff and get the details. And they said, we talked to him. We wanted to bring him into a skiff and find out what he knows. And he says, well, I'm not really prepared to talk about it, this, that, and other thing. They said, that's okay, we'll get you in the skiff. And he goes, well, okay. He goes, if you want me to come into a skiff, I'll come into a skiff, but I will tell you in the skiff the same thing I'm telling you right now. And that was one of a very frustrating moment, particularly on meeting people that, within the task force that have stepped down, in government insiders that had the clearances to